Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So on behalf of the Academic Training to Inform Police Responses, I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Policing and People with Developmental Disabilities, Emerging Issues in the Field, with our featured presenters today, Chief William Scott, Chief Ronald Sellon, Russell Lehman, and Leon Davis, and I will be introducing them in a few minutes here. But before I do that, I want to turn it over for welcome and introduction to Dr. Hannah McManus, our co-principal investigator of the Academic Training to Inform Police Responses from the University of Cincinnati. Hannah?
Thank you, Mike. And thank you to all of you for joining our webinar today on policing and people with developmental disabilities. My name is Hannah McManus, and in addition to serving as co-principal investigator for the Academic Training to Inform Police Responses, I am a research associate at the University of Cincinnati's Center for Police Research and Policy. This webinar has been made possible through the support of the Bureau of Justice Assistance as part of the Academic Training to Inform Police Responses. The Academic Training Initiative was born out of the recognition that as communities examine how they respond to individuals with behavioral health conditions and developmental disabilities, it's important that we learn from practitioners about best practices in the field and also from researchers who are working to build the evidence base on the effectiveness of those practices. My colleagues from the University of Cincinnati and I are joined in this effort by subject matter experts from Policy Research Associates, the ARC of the United States National Center for Criminal Justice and Disability, and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Together, our team is building and delivering training, technical assistance, and companion resources that are centered around best practices in crisis response that are supported by research. Our goal is to support law enforcement agencies and their community partners in their responses to people with behavioral health conditions and developmental disabilities, and to ensure that these encounters are more effective and equitable, but also safer for both citizens and law enforcement officers. Today, you will be hearing from several presenters who will speak on the topic of law enforcement encounters with people with developmental disabilities, or co-occurring conditions. These speakers will highlight how understanding effective ways to interact with people with developmental disabilities can enhance the outcomes of these interactions. But before we hear from our speakers, I would like to introduce you to another important partner of the Academic Training Initiative. Alyssa Rumsey is a senior policy advisor for the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and she joins us today to provide a few opening remarks from the BJA. Alyssa?
Thank you so much, Hannah. Good morning to all of you on the West Coast, and good afternoon to those of us on the East Coast. I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us today for what is sure to be a really lively and engaging conversation. So, as noted, my name is Alyssa Rumsey, and I work at the Justice Department's Bureau of Justice Assistance, known fairly commonly as BJA. I wanted to share a little bit about what we do here at BJA to give you a sense of what tools might be available to all of you in the audience, including, most importantly, some funding opportunities that are available as we speak. So with that said, I strongly encourage you to check out our website, bja.gov, sign up for our listserv so you can get notices about these funding opportunities. In addition to funding, we also provide free of charge training and technical assistance. So those of you who work in law enforcement, behavioral health, community mental health, you are eligible for all sorts of free training and technical assistance from our office here at BJA. Currently, as I mentioned, we have a number of funding opportunities available specific to law enforcement and community mental health. Apologize, I can't really be sure if anyone can see me right now, but I was just going to sort of hold up some of our various solicitations, give you a sense of what they look like. Most of them are about 30 pages or so. And they lay out, again, numerous funding opportunities that BJA provides directly to law enforcement, state and local governments. etc. I also want to thank all of our presenters here today. You can see we have a really amazing group of panelists from across the United States, the Chief of Police from San Francisco, the Chief of Police from Mansfield, Massachusetts. We have Leanne Davis from the ARC, a well-known expert in the field of disability rights. And then we also have Russell Lehman, someone who I've recently come to know, who is a poet, an author. He attended MIT. He's a former high school athlete. I also had a chance to pick up his book recently, which I highly recommend, called On the Outside Looking In. A really engaging read, one of the best books I've read in a long time. So thank you to Russell, Leanne, Chief Scott, and Chief Salon for being here today. And thanks, of course, to the University of Cincinnati, Hannah and her colleagues for facilitating this conversation. So with that, thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to Hannah.
Thank you, Alyssa. Now I'd like to turn things over to Mike Hatch, who is Senior Project Associate for Policy Research Associates and the moderator for the remainder of this webinar. He's going to provide us with a few logistical details, as well as the formal introduction of our speakers. Mike?
Thank you, Hannah. Before we get started with our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping things to go through. As with any webinar, the disclaimer that we have to read for these. The preparation of this webinar was supported by grant number 2020 NTBXK001, awarded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The Bureau of Justice Assistance is a component of the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs, which also includes the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the SMART Office. Point of views or opinions in this webinar are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. As a reminder, questions. Please submit your questions to the presenters in the Q&A pod. The presenters will address as many questions as time presents at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and the slides will be disseminated in the days following the webinar. We also offer ASL interpretation during this webinar. Our ASL interpreters for this meeting are Michelle Johnson and Katie Lambie, and live transcription from Zoom is available. Click the live transcript CC and then select show subtitle. Subtitles can be moved within the window and resized. With that, I will introduce all four of today's presenters, and then I will turn it over to the last person that I introduced, Leanne. So the first person that I'd like to introduce is Chief William Scott from the San Francisco, California Police Department. Chief Scott was sworn in January of 2017. And he joined San Francisco PD after 27 years with the LAPD. Chief Scott's focus is on community policing with an emphasis on implementing major reforms, especially as it relates to providing service with dignity and respect. One of the first steps of this endeavor was to create a viable and sustainable strategic plan to successfully implement the reform initiatives that were outlined in the Department of Justice's collaborative review initiative performed on the San Francisco Police Department, while at the same time addressing public safety and reducing crime. These reforms, which included 272 recommendations, focus on 5 key areas of policing: accountability, bias, community policing, recruitment, hiring and personnel practices, and use of force. Chief Scott grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, Roll Tide Chief, and is married with 3 children. He attended the University of Alabama with a degree in accounting. He is also a graduate of Senior Management of Institute of Policing. Our next speaker is Chief Ron Sellon, who is the proud father of a child with disabilities, passionately committed to improving services, and is the police chief for the town of Mansfield, Massachusetts, where he's held that position since 2013. He's a military veteran who holds a bachelor's degree in law enforcement, a master's degree in public safety administration, and a Juris Doctor law degree. Chief Sellon is a licensed attorney, a graduate of the FBI National Academy, Session 245, and Police Executive Research Forum, Session 65. He sits on the board of directors of the Bristol County Police Chiefs Association and is currently the first vice president of the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council. He currently sits on the executive board of the IACP as vice president, treasurer, having previously been a member of the Human and Civil Rights Committee. Next up is Russell Lehman. Russell is an award-winning and internationally recognized motivational speaker and poet contextualizing autism, mental health, disabilities, and the overall human condition. His words have been featured in the USA Today, LA Times, NPR, Yahoo News, Success Magazine, and archived in the Library of Congress. Russell is also a contributor for Psychology Today. A graduate of MIT's Leadership in the Digital Age course, Russell sits on the National Board of Directors for the ARC and is a council member for the Autism Society of America. He has also been the youth ambassador for the mayor of Reno, Nevada, and a member of Nevada Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, as well as the Nevada Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorder. Russell showed signs of autism as a newborn. However, he was not formally diagnosed until the age of 12 after suffering through 5 weeks in a lockdown psychiatric facility. His new book, On the Outside Looking In, recently hit bookstores nationwide and is in fact the second book that Russell has authored. And last but certainly not least is Leanne Davis. Leanne is the Director of Justice Initiatives at the ARC of the United States. She directs the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Development and Disability. She oversaw the development of NCCJD's signature training, Pathways to Justice, and passionately works to establish NCCJD and the ARC's 650 chapter network as the go-to place for information and training on justice and disability. As the ARC's subject matter expert on the topic of justice and IDD, she provides consultation to federal and nonprofit agencies and has provided guidance to the White House officials. Her mission is to ensure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have a platform and the training they need to advocate for themselves, especially as citizens who are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. I will turn it over to Leanne to go through our learning objectives. Leanne?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for being here today. I'm very hopeful that once you get through this webinar, you are going to have some great ideas, tips, strategies, and new thinking about how to respond to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And again, a big thank you to our panelists who are joining us as well. So I just want to go over some of our learning objectives for today. One key thing that we want to take away is really understanding the importance of why law enforcement training is so needed. So we'll start with a realistic case scenario that can really lay the groundwork for that. We're going to be looking at key tips in these areas, including assessing a situation, identifying if someone may have a disability, how to communicate with that individual, and then some tips for de-escalation. And then last, we'll finish it with exploring some emerging issues that involve law enforcement and this community specifically. So I wanted to get started, as I said, with a case scenario, and we're going to watch this brief video. This is regarding a person with autism, and this is his dad, Adam Wolf, talking about a situation that occurred. And then we're going to open it up to the panel to get some first reactions to it, and then also ask some of the questions that you see here on the slide as well. So let's go ahead and play the video, please.
I've told people I'm pro-police, but I'm not pro-abuse. There's a very fine line when it comes to that.
That's why Adam Wolf is so upset about the encounter his 17-year-old son Preston had with police yesterday afternoon.
He was just standing there with his scooter when the police showed up.
You can see him following police instruction when told to sit down. When the officer tried to cuff him, he tried to run away.
For a child with autism who doesn't like to be touched, that officer felt the need to grab him and throw him to the ground. And then after he had him on the ground, he climbed on top and he punched him in the face.
Police say there was a reason for the officer to stop the teen.
PD officers responded to a report of a potential stabbing or an assault with a deadly weapon, reported to be a knife or a pipe.
According to police and Preston's father, the teenager got into a scuffle with the 16-year-old boy. That teenager apparently called authorities.
We understand the video on social media is very difficult to watch. When responding to a 911 call regarding a potential stabbing or an assault with a deadly weapon, officers were unaware at that time that this male suspect was a special needs individual.
Preston's father says things need to change.
Not all cops are bad, but there are bad apples in every bunch. And the behavior that I saw in that video is disturbing, it's sickening, and it should never have happened.
The officer involved in the encounter is still on the job as the investigation continues. In Cheryl Hurd, NBC Bay Area News.
Okay, so just with that as sort of an opening to why it's important to have training on this topic, I think I'll start with you, Chief Sellon. I know that this is something that we had talked about previously as we prepared for the webinar today, but just from a parent's perspective too, I know that you probably have some ideas around the need for training, and this is one example.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. As you know, as we talked about before, my family had a similar incident, and again, in the conversations that I ultimately ended up having with the command staff of that organization, it spoke to the need for awareness training. It spoke to the need for the training with regards to de-escalation and recognition of the fact that merely because someone isn't responding to you or reacting in a way that you immediately want, it's not necessarily because the fact that they're resisting or they are opposing what it is that you're asking them. They may have a sensory issue, they may have a learning disability, they may not merely understand. And what it comes down to for me is that to Chief Scott's credit, the emphasis on community policing is critical in this arena, because the more you invest in community policing, the more you're going to know your community. The more you know about your community, the more connections you're going to have, the higher the likelihood of the officers knowing and being able to identify who has disabilities.
Thank you so much for that. And along that same lines, I know Chief Scott, you and I had talked about that too. And as a parent yourself, I mean, just do you have any general thoughts about the video and the need for police training, seeing how situations like this can happen and how training could make that different?
Yes, thank you. And good morning, everybody. I just want to echo Chief Sellon's comments as well, because awareness is key. You heard the officer in the video speak to the officer who encountered that young man, was not aware that he had developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. And oftentimes without the training, that awareness or the likelihood of that awareness taking place is greatly minimized. So awareness is key, but awareness doesn't happen without the training. So they go hand in hand. And we really do have to emphasize that awareness and training. And the training can't all be internal. For us, we work with our local ARC, and we've developed actually autism training with ARC here in San Francisco, the ARC of San Francisco. And it was instrumental in really, I think, getting us to a better place with our community policing and our awareness. And the last thing I'll add is, once we implemented that training, a lot of officers who have either people in their family or children with disabilities came forward. And then that became really a force multiplier of the training itself, because they can tell their personal stories and they have a better understanding of the issue because they live with it every day, like myself. So I think they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief Scott. And I'm wondering too, Russell, from your perspective, how this scenario could go differently. What would have been more of an effective response from your perspective as a person living with autism?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think, obviously we don't have much audio on that video clip, and but the one thing I always say is dialogue in whatever form of communication that might mean. When I'm having a meltdown, I have had a lot of meltdowns in public, and I've been, had very close calls with police in the past and in the recent past as well. So just watching that video was very triggering for me, because one of my biggest fears is being shot by police. I have to live with that every day, because when I have a meltdown in public, just because, people can't tell I have a disability because it's invisible, people think I'm this kind of crazed maniac who's just, walking around and crying and having a meltdown on the floor. They don't ask questions, right? They just come to that conclusion based on face value. But I always say what you do not see is oftentimes more important than what you do see. So I would just encourage all police officers, sheriffs to ask themselves, what am I not seeing here? What might be some context behind the situation? Can I ask a question that might inform me to that context I might be missing out on? Because let's be honest, every time I've had police called on me, the police didn't deserve to be there. They should have been somewhere else. We are wasting their time. We are wasting my time. Obviously, in this video, there was cause for concern. So it's a different matter, but it all goes back to dialogue. Easy yes or no questions, because individuals with autism, they have a hard time processing information when they're having a meltdown or in any kind of stressful scenario. So again, sincerity, communication, and just, compassion. Yeah, you can still be a police officer, but be a compassionate police officer. That's the biggest ask I have for those on the force, is just be a little more compassionate, and to be able to validate me and see the struggle and suffering in my eyes in those moments will help me be able to help them better.
Sorry, good points. I forgot I was muted. Thank you for just kind of providing the opening and setting the stage for what we'll be talking about today. And just to note, in case you missed it, we do have a panel of one person who has autism, Russell, and then Chief Selon and both Chief Scott are parents of children with disabilities. So I'm just so grateful that you bring that lens to this topic. I am trying to click to the next slide and it's not letting me. So Julie, I don't know if you can help with that.
I've told people.
There we go. Thank you. So I just wanted to give sort of an overview of what we're talking about when we say intellectual developmental disabilities. I know it can be difficult to know what the differences are between mental health disability, and then sometimes we use cognitive disability, and there's a lot of terms out there. But I want to provide some basic terminology from the disability field in case you are new to it. So developmental disability, sometimes you might see the DD, is an umbrella term that includes many diagnoses, all that start before age 22. And this is a lifelong disability, so there's no cure for a developmental disability. And it's really more of an umbrella term because it includes people that may have a physical disability and not have an intellectual disability. So it's much broader when you're thinking about types of disabilities that this could fall under. Now, if we look at the next one called intellectual disability, this occurs also before the age of 22. There's also no cure. And it includes functioning and adaptive behaviors. But the key difference here is that anyone with an intellectual disability, their cognition is affected. So the cognitive piece of that, it's important to understand that if you're working with someone that has an intellectual disability specifically, they may need different types of accommodations or supports, and to understand that there is a difference too between these types of disabilities and mental health disability. And we actually will share a resource about that that you can get off of the academic training website a little bit later. But there is something called co-occurring disability too, where people can have both. And we know that people with intellectual or developmental disabilities are more likely to have a mental health disability compared to the general population. So that's something important to keep in mind. And then when it comes to the number of people impacted by intellectual disability, we know that between 1% to 3% of Americans have an intellectual disability. And some of the more common diagnoses that you may have heard about is autism, Down syndrome. There's also Fragile X syndrome and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And if you want more information on that, please feel free to contact me later or look this information up on our website. I wish we could go more into this, but given our time, I'm going to move on and explain to you why it's so important that we have training on this topic, specifically for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We know that people with these types of disabilities face the highest risk of victimization rates. And we get this data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics that shows that looks at different types of disabilities and shows that those with cognitive do face the highest rates. And within that umbrella of cognitive disability are people with Down syndrome, autism, dementia, learning disabilities, intellectual disability, and traumatic brain injury. So this data is pretty broad in terms of what we're looking at, but what I think it really helps us discover is that this is a population that can be much more at risk for getting into the criminal justice system. And I'm going to go ahead and look at the next slide, because not only are they at risk as victims, they're also at risk as suspects or defendants. This data, also from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, shows that 2 in 10 prisoners and 3 in 10 jail inmates reported having a cognitive disability specifically. Again, we're seeing a theme because this is the most commonly reported type of disability. This really helps us key in, and thank goodness we have the data, this data to show us that this is a population that we really want to understand as much as possible, know how to respond to, and understand what kinds of supports we can provide, especially when we have common interactions with people with disabilities. And I'm sharing this from the International Association of Chiefs of Police model policy on IDD, which is available online, and we've got the link there. This is an opportunity for us to think about what are the most common types of interactions people with IDD may have. And we know that they are often used by others to carry out criminal activity. They can be highly suggestible and easy to manipulate. They may often report suspicious or out of the ordinary behavior. So what might be an ordinary behavior for someone with autism, for example, stimming, might seem very out of the ordinary to others. And so a citizen may just report that because they're not sure about what's going on. There could be disturbances, wandering is another issue, and as well as seizures. So I wanted to pause here and just get some feedback from the panel. Are these some of the common interactions that you have seen before? And is there anything on here that you have seen fairly common that is not already on this list? So Chief, we could continue our pattern. And Chief Selon, do you want to start?
Sure. So, yeah, there's obviously, with regards to the common interactions, wandering, again, it all comes back to, awareness. And it all comes back to training, whether it be ALEC training, whether it be training through other organizations like Culture City with regard that specializes in sensory awareness training for first responders. It begins in that regard, but then it also, as I pointed out earlier, it has to do with knowing your community. And, connecting with, for instance, in Mansfield, we have a special education parents advisory council, which basically works through our school systems, and working with them to identify who the children are and, which children do have disabilities, so that in the event that they do wander, we can establish.
All right, great. Thank you. And Chief Scott, did you have any thoughts on this one as well?
Yeah, yes, I do. And I would add, those are fairly common for us as well. And again, probably Chief Sellen and I will continually reemphasize awareness and training, because those are the first keys. But I would add the one thing that can exacerbate those common interactions, and that's when there is some types of substance disorder, or whether it be alcohol or some type of medication or some type of illegal substance, narcotics, that can really take those common interactions and elevate them to a much higher level. So, and in San Francisco, that is an issue for us that we have to deal with. And when possible, still awareness is a key, but then you have to also deal with, the common signs of those types of intoxication or whatever, if there's drug use that are in play, and they're not independent, as we would all probably agree to. I mean, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, sometimes have those issues with substance disorders. So we really have to be careful when we approach those subjects, because it can really elevate a situation, and then you still have to deal with working through the IDD, the intellectual and developmental disability issues. So it makes it more complex. And that's something that I do think we're working at, because we deal with that quite often, that we're working at to be better at. But there's, I think, a lot of training in front of us in terms of combining those two worlds. I mean, right now we have an opioid crisis in this country, and it goes across all walks of life. So that's something that I would like to flag for the group, and definitely discussions that we need to explore further, I believe.
That is a great point, Chief Scott, and I'm so glad you raised that, because that's something we have to talk about needing more research on, is this crossover of people with intellectual developmental disabilities who are also addicted to substances or use substances. Are we doing do we have enough resources to do the types of research and know the kinds of treatment that really are accessible to this population? So I'm so glad you raised that. Thank you. And then Russell, I didn't know if you had anything to add to this one as well.
Yeah, I would just chime in to Chief Scott's point of kind of recognize the distinction between what might be use of drugs or what might be otherwise, for me, like stimming behavior. When I have again, most of my encounters, traumatic encounters in public with police have been when I have a meltdown in public. And a form of stimming when I have a meltdown is I'll either pound my chest or hit myself in the head, because my brain is inflamed and the mental agony is so much that I'm not hitting myself to be violent, or I'm not hitting the ground to be violent. I would rather have a distraction of the physical pain rather than what's going on up here. So oftentimes when I do train officers and I describe to them the worst of my meltdowns, I would ask them, well, what would your first thought be if you saw someone acting in such a behavior? And they often say, I would think you were on some kind of drug. So, and again, when I have a meltdown, the amygdala is inflamed. When you have autism, you're in a constant state of fight or flight. So there is that appearance that you are running on adrenaline. So just to be able to kind of learn more about the substance abuse and, again, what a meltdown might consist of when in regards to autism would be very beneficial for preventing any unnecessary stressful and traumatic encounters.
Great, thank you for that. So let's now go to, we're in a situation where an officer actually comes into contact with someone that they think might have an intellectual or developmental disability. And I know one of the things we talked about together previously is what would be that first step. And Chief Scott, I know you raised the need to really, before we even think about identification, think about assessing the situation. So do you want to just speak to the importance of situational awareness, especially as it, relates to this population?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leanne. And I just want to thank Russell for his comments, because hearing that really kind of really put into, I think, a very tighter and more succinct context of what I was trying to say. So Russell, thank you for that. So on this issue, assessing the situation, again, going back to training, in San Francisco, and I think many departments do what we're doing in terms of crisis intervention training, or we may call it crisis response training in some departments. But really the fundamental concept is to slow things down so you have more time to assess. We use the concepts time and distance, get time and distance. Russell's example where how he copes with whatever he's dealing with and the pounding on the head. A lot of officers might think that that's a sign of some type of substance usage or whatever. But if you are able to put yourself in a tactical position to slow things down and not overcommit, open a line of communications, you have more time to have that dialogue with a person to get an understanding of what's going on. And then we have to be good listeners. And that's a part of our training. Police officers are trained to take command of situations, particularly chaotic situations. And sometimes that taking command and getting control of the situation can really overshadow the need to listen to what people are saying. And we have to be able, as we take command of a chaotic situation and try to ensure everybody is going to be safe, we have to listen. So slowing it down, keep some separation, time and distance are things that really in policing today that many departments, including ours, have gone to. And what we are seeing is better outcomes, much better outcomes. In San Francisco, outcomes with those types of calls of people in crisis rarely result in the use of force, because we've implemented that specific mode of training. It's called crisis intervention training, which is in total about 50 hours of training. It's a lift to get everybody in the department trained, but it's something that we're committed to because we're seeing the better outcomes, we're seeing better interactions, and it's worth every hour of training and every dollar that we invest in it.
Thank you so much. And asking that all important question, what's really going on? And I think one of you already mentioned that, but having that mindfulness of, awareness and building that into these interactions is so important. So let's say that we've assessed the situation and now we're moving on to identification. So we're thinking there could possibly be a disability. So these are some tips for identification that officers can think about when it comes to this population specifically. And I wanted to see Chief Scott, I know we had talked about under stress that it can be harder for people with intellectual disability to respond. So has that been something that you've seen yourself, or are these identification tips something that you have used before?
Yes, both questions I will answer yes. I mean, even in my personal life with my own son, and I have other people in my family with disabilities, under stress, it makes the situation, I believe, on both sides more stressful. And in terms of my son, when he's under stress, he has difficulty communicating. So, as a parent, I have to kind of back off sometimes and take the temperature down a little bit. And again, that's a part of awareness. And I think my training at work helped me with that. But at work, I've been in that situation many times. And if you can afford yourself the luxury of time by using the proper tactics and keeping a distance where you don't have to react, where you're not put in a situation where you have to react or overreact, it does give you an opportunity to assess those tips, the identification tips that you have on the screen here. And we have to also understand that, and I know, Leanne, you and I talked about technology and how important that is to this issue and with autonomy. I mean, many, particularly adults with disability who have the technology, whether it be a cell phone or some type of assistive technology, listening devices. Officers sometimes, in the spirit of keeping themselves and others safe, for instance, will make people drop what's in their hands. As we're taught, the hands are what kill, right? So if you see something in the hands and you're not sure what it is, and let's say it's a cell phone, and I'll go back to my son. That cell phone is his lifeline. So without knowing that, if I'm an officer and I approach somebody like him and tell them to drop their cell phone or put their cell phone, or somehow I confiscate that cell phone, it's going to elevate that situation. And being able to communicate and understand, number one, that you're dealing with a person with intellectual or developmental disabilities, and they may need assistance through those types of technologies, is really, really key. And for an officer, we have to be more patient. Again, the tactics are everything. We have to have some consideration on using those types of tools and technology to communicate better and to lead us to better outcomes. So I think all those things are key, but it all goes back to awareness, creating space to have a conversation, and then making that proper assessment.
Great, thank you, Chief Scott. And I'm wondering too, Chief Sellon, if these types of identification tips, if these have come in handy for you, or maybe if there's even something missing on here.
Yeah, no, Chief Scott just gave us a lot to discuss and correct when it comes to CIT training. Oftentimes what I find is that, and again, I just want to throw this out there that, we use the phrase law enforcement a lot, but I think that that's a bit of a misnomer, because I think that really narrows the field of exactly what it is that we do. And our job, it comes back to what our job is, and generally what some people believe, and this is the philosophy that I'm trying to stamp out of our profession, is that they believe our job is merely to show up, demand compliance with the law, and then disappear. And the reality is that our job is to produce outcomes for people that make their lives easier. And that means at times what we need to do is take a look at our own basic response model, the culture of the organization, whether or not we're establishing training that really emphasizes things like, listen, give the person space. I tell police officers that, what's the first thing that you're going to do when you show up to a barricaded hostage situation? You're going to create space and you're going to slow the situation down, allow everybody to calm down. I said, so why not simply do the same exact thing when you're dealing with every other person that you interact with? What do you have to lose by creating space and slowing the situation down and allowing yourself and that person the opportunity to recognize each other as human beings, and quite frankly, the intricacies that come along with that, and identifying whether or not that person has an intellectual or developmental disability that you can you can, again, tweak your response to be a little bit more nuanced to the situation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And Russell, did you have anything to add on this one as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, when it comes to identification, body language says a lot, right? I think we really need to be more aware of the individual's body language and our own body language if you're a police officer, right? I think, standing over somebody when, if I'm having a meltdown and an officer stands over me, well, that's probably not the best thing, right? Try to picture yourself in their shoes, that connection through empathy of when you have a stressful moment as an officer or anybody on the scene, how would you like to be treated, right? So space is a big one. If I'm on the ground having a meltdown or just sitting on a curb, don't put yourself on my level, crouch down, obviously give me some space. But again, it's about that human connection. You want to start feeling like you're, again, sincere in being there. And again, like what Chief Scott said about his son and the cell phone, I can picture myself with certain inanimate objects that mean a hell of a lot to me because they bring me comfort. And in a heightened moment of stress, if the cop told me to, if I was holding my pillow, right, I have this like comfort pillow. If they told me to drop that, I wouldn't be able to drop it. I really wouldn't. Even if I was cognizant of the fact that I might get hurt if I didn't, I still would not do it because it means that much to me. So again, just taking into awareness the totality of the situation. And how do we do that? We go in being curious about a situation, leaving our preconceived notions behind, obviously taking training and education into account, but always being curious, always asking questions, whether it be to yourself or the individual, to make the most sense out of the situation at hand.
That's excellent. And I think that's a great lens to use as we think about identification. And I just wanted to mention them that the first one we talked about was difficulty communicating or expressing themselves. That might be something you see. We already mentioned easily influenced. People may want to hide their disability as well, and even make real effort to cover it up. And that can be really a difficult situation when you're, trying to help someone and trying to know what their needs are. But one of the things you can do, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you don't have to ask specifically about, do you have a disability? But you can say, how can I help you? Or what do you need? And you can get to some of the same kinds of responses in terms of just knowing what that person needs first and mentioning that. Someone may be unresponsive. I think Chief Sellon, you mentioned that some may actually run away from the police altogether, and that can really look not good. So, considering why is this person running, and may not make eye contact. But I do want to mention that this is a case by case. You can't say everyone with a disability is going to fit in these categories every time. But we just want to provide some general understanding around this so that officers can get an idea of what they might want look out for when they're thinking someone may have a disability. We also included in this slide some questions that can be asked to get again to that question, such as, is there anything you want to tell me? Did or ask, have you been in special education classes? How does the person support themselves? For example, you could ask, do you receive SSI? And then asking about the identification card. But that is very, you want to be very careful with that to make sure that that the individual feels safe about getting that card out and that they know nothing's going to happen. We know in the disability field that when people with disabilities have been trained around using these cards, they may go ahead and grab for something and the officer doesn't know what they're going for. So we try to make sure that both sides are trained about how to use these kinds of tools. And then some more tips for communication. Now that we kind of went from identifying to communicating, a lot of these you have already mentioned, actually, in terms of taking that extra time, speaking slowly and clearly, using that simple language and picture, symbols, communication boards. Chief Scott, you already brought up the technology. So looking at the apps that can be used for that as well. It's important to ask if a support person is available. And I know that already the chapters of the ARC have been raised in both of your communities, and then assisting in filling out forms as needed and making sure that whenever a person is coming in contact with the system, whether it's an officer or going into the police stations or wherever they're going, that they're provided those accommodations and supports that they need. So I'm just wondering, Chief Sellon, on this one, you had talked about, before that it's important to provide these kinds of supports. You want to just mention anything on this slide specifically?
Yeah, so in specific, I would just also add the fact that, call on local disability agencies like the local chapters of the ARC. I can tell you that the ARC of Bristol County here in Massachusetts, the ARC of Norfolk County, incredibly helpful for us. But I would also suggest strongly that agencies begin creating co-responder programs that help them facilitate solutions to these problems on a broader scale. And by that I mean, you're going to create, and when you do create a responder program, find an organization that is local, find an organization that is regional, and then find an organization that is national, that can almost act as compounders and filters and expand resources, because your local chapter is going to have much more hands on local. So for instance, around our area, we have the Doug Flutie Foundation, which has been incredibly helpful in getting certain technologies for children that are that have a habit of running away and facilitating getting resources to families. We also have the ARC, and then there are other organizations as well. But each one of those having that local, regional, and then national organization that you partner with expands your scope of resources, and it also expands the network of subject matter experts that you can bring in to inform your first responders, so that when they do respond, they have somebody that they can reach out to on any given point.
All great points. Thank you. And that actually leads well into what you all have already discussed today, but this all important tips for de-escalation. So, you know, we've kind of gone through assessing the situation, and then we talked about identifying if someone might have an intellectual or developmental disability. We touched on communication tips. And so now we're at that piece of looking at de-escalation. If something has escalated, how do we start to address that for people with IDD specifically? And some of the things that we had talked about before were identifying triggers. You know, if something might be a trigger for someone, and applying that situational awareness, also thinking about how you can use the environment to your advantage, and then as well as the training and education piece that you've all talked about. I'm wondering, Chief Scott, about the situational awareness or how to use the environment to your advantage. Did you want to speak to any of those? Oh, you're on mute. Wait, we can't hear you. There we go.
I'm sorry. Sure, thank you.
No problem.
I was, thank you. Yeah. No, what I would add to this, and this is something that Chief Sellon mentioned as well, is support persons. So support, because many people with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, oftentimes, whether it be a family member or a friend, or they're in an environment where there is a support network, oftentimes they will have a support person. And part of the recognition that, you know, number one, that we're engaging and we're encountering a person with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, part of that training is that they do oftentimes have a support network. So whether that support person is on scene or can be reached by, you know, telephone, or is close enough where they can come in and help support that person, that's a really important component of de-escalation. And oftentimes in policing, you know, we try to oftentimes sterilize a situation, and you know, the less people, the more you have to deal with. But it's counterintuitive to how we train, actually. In this situation, we really have to kind of go against our training, or for many of us anyway, at least when I came in, that's how I was trained. We have to go against that intuition and bring in others to support this situation and support the person that we're encountering. It can be very, very effective and very helpful. And as the chief said, you know, we do this oftentimes with barricaded situations, if we can do it, you know, and there's rules of the game and engagement when we do use a support person, but I think that can be very helpful. And then the other thing I would say in terms of tips for de-escalation, we talked about technology, but we haven't yet talked about ambulatory aids for people with physical disabilities and developmental disabilities that cause physical aids to be needed. Oftentimes that can be a trigger. And if you recognize that, for instance, if somebody has, let's say, a walking mobility device that an officer says, oh, this can be used as a weapon, which is not uncommon, and so that's taken away, that can be an enormous trigger. And we have to recognize those things. And oftentimes, once the situation is static and we understand that there are no weapons, no guns, no knives, or the person is not going to use that mobility device against us or anybody else, we have to consider, well, they need it, let's give it back to them and let's de-escalate, because that piece is really an easy piece. And we see that oftentimes with mobility devices. And I offer that up for part of an ongoing model that should be included in our training and our conversations.
Excellent, excellent point. Thank you so much for raising that, because, you know, in the disability community, folks have often said that's a part of them.
Right.
The device that is needed, and for that to be taken away, or it can cause real concern. So that is a great point that you raise. And whether a person has a physical disability or an intellectual developmental disability, we know that people are more prone to need those kinds of things. So it really does apply to people with disabilities across the board. And I think the more that we can speak to those issues and look at how people with disabilities in general need these types of accommodations, the more kind of a universal approach, you know, we can take to the topic overall. So I'm so glad you raised that. Thank you for that. And then Russell, I think that this is probably something you're familiar with, the triggers, and what in your mind would really be helpful in terms of de-escalation from your viewpoint?
Yeah, from my viewpoint, I'd love if, every police officer, every CIT team, every, firefighter, social worker that is on the scene has some kind of kit in their car, whether that be a soft ball I could squeeze when I'm having a meltdown, or essential oils, or a pair of headphones that I might not have on me at the moment. Keep like a sensory kit in your vehicle so you can help de-escalate the situation. Also, speaking from my own personal perspective, individuals with autism are much more likely to have mental health comorbidities. So in terms of mental disabilities, when I have a meltdown, my OCD comes into play, my depression, anxiety, PTSD, and all those will come into play too in the background, so to speak. So if I can have a squeezy ball, so I can squeeze it a certain number of times so my OCD calms down a little bit, and it's used as a stim, that will help me soothe myself, right? And so there are various ways you can de-escalate the situation. And again, you can also ask the individual about their hobbies. There are certain things that most individuals on the spectrum take great comfort in certain things, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a phone, whether it's my pillow, right? Things that will bring them almost instant comfort in the moment of stress, whether that's showing them a picture of their favorite cartoon character or playing one of their favorite songs on your overhead speakers. There's many things that can help ease the situation at hand until you get perhaps another person on the scene, such as the individual's mom, or in a local disability agency, or just a CIT team.
Great tips. And I saw in the chat, everyone saying, what a great tip. So yes, and we have seen these kinds of sensory kits really come onto the scene in terms of being something that's been useful. I would love to see us do some research on that and see what types of responses are really the most effective when it comes to encounters with police. So maybe that's something we should think about as a research agenda in the field to add to. And then Chief Selon, I know this was one of the key points that you raised, just around the environment, how to use the environment to your advantage, and the importance of police executives to really support this. So I was hoping you might speak to those issues.
Yeah, so I think that any situation, it begins, obviously culture begins at the top, and it depends on what you reinforce, right? So there's a number of things. First of all, it has to do with who you hire. Second of all, it has to do with what you value. And third of all, it has to do with also supporting those initiatives. So, if you say we're gonna emphasize de-escalation, we're gonna emphasize de-escalation, but yet you don't put your money where your mouth is. I think it was, once upon a time, President Biden said, if you want to show me where your priorities are, I'll just show me your budget and I'll show you where your priorities are. And realistically, it comes down to, it starts at the top. It has to do with the culture. It has to do with what your office, what your executives promote and what they emphasize. So if you spend all of your time sending all of your cops to SWAT training, or you send all your, you spend more time on the range than you do in ALEC training, or with an organization like Culture City, or in other, various sensory awareness training situations, then you're doing yourself a disservice as an executive.
And on that note, when you say ALEC, do you want to explain what ALEC training is, or do you remember what it stands for?
Yeah, so ALEC training is autism. Sure, any of the acronyms you want to throw at me while we're here?
Autism awareness for law enforcement?
It's, yeah, I believe it's Autism Law Enforcement Education Coalition training or something. I'm almost positive that that's what the last word is for. And forgive me if it's.
A little bit more about it.
Sure. So ALEC training is essentially it's training on recognizing both the elements of various intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as giving officers tools to identify individuals that they are encountering that their non-compliance, again, and I'm going to keep harping on this, their non-compliance is not related to a
I think we may be losing sound, or am I the only one? Can everyone?
I can't hear him either.
Uh-oh, Chief Cellon, I think we're.
sorry. Sorry.
The connection. You want to try again?
Yeah, so do you have me now?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry about that. ALEC training is essentially it's giving officers the tools to be able to identify when people have intellectual or developmental disabilities, and then giving them the ability to recognize that, and then also alternative responses that they can apply in those situations.
Thank you. I know you've mentioned a few really good resources, so I want to make sure people hear what those are. And then, of course, we can provide that. If you have questions for any of the panelists, we can follow up and provide any of these resources for you as well. And thank you. Someone may have put it in the chat, so it's always great to have people helping out in the chat as well. So now that we talked about the steps, this is one of the things that we've provided through our Pathways to Justice training through the National Center here. It was a wallet card that we provided after going through the training that law enforcement would get to think about how to spot what is often a hidden disability, and 3 steps to consider. One is to look deeper. So it's everything you all said, pause if you can, and look deeper and think about, could there be a hidden disability? Because they're not necessarily identified by behaviors, but they're identified by behaviors and not appearance. And then secondly, to slow down and to call a supervisor or support person if possible. And then ask yourself, what is really going on here? How could disability be playing a role? So a lot of it is just that awareness of considering how someone's cognition or the impact of how they experience their surroundings could be playing a role in how you're interacting with them. And it seems like as officers, that can be really hard when it's so fast paced and you're having to make decisions so quickly. So I'm wondering if you could just speak to these different steps. Is this something you think would be helpful for officers to use? Is there something missing here? And is this realistic? To have officers to be able to look deeper, slow down, and ask themselves these questions. And it could be that it's not necessarily doing it right there in the moment, but through training, have this ready to go and be thinking about this before, an officer is in a situation involving someone with an intellectual disability. So, Chief Scott, you want to start?
Sure. And make sure I'm not muted this time. I think it's a great list, and I think it's a great start. One thing that I would add, maybe between or in number 2, as far as slow down, before you call, as a part of implementing training, we have to train officers to ask the question to the person, do you have a support person? And I know it goes without saying, you got to figure out how to get that information first, but I think in terms of training and routinizing this type of response, asking the question as to whether a person has a support staff person is a necessity, because many and I'll go back to my personal situation. My son, I don't think he would offer or volunteer that situation in a context of him encountering a police officer. He would probably be too scared, stressed out, even though he's been around policing all his life, so it doesn't necessarily scare him in that way. But I think in an interaction, if he's in a car and we're not there, his parents or siblings, and he stopped, I don't know that he would say, "Can you call my support person?" So asking the question, I think, is vital to getting to that point. So I would add that.
Thank you so much. And Chief Salon, is there anything you would add to it? Or any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would. The one thing I would also add is that when you're looking at how helping and assisting officers in spotting hidden disabilities, I can't emphasize enough the value of having a social worker on staff within a police department that's working with police officers, or and also an embedded mental health clinician that is working with the officers, because the more time that they spend even just riding around in a patrol car, they're going to, those officers are going to learn things through osmosis just by talking to both of those type of individuals, and adding them to the roster of a police department and helping facilitate the response overall is going to make your response model as a police executive more effective in the long run.
Great points. Thank you so much for that. And the last part we wanted to end on was some emerging issues. So thinking about the future of policing and how it intersects with people with this type of disability. And these are some of the key points that we had raised previously as we spoke together about it. One, I think, Chief Salon, this was your point around community policing and co-response programs, which you just mentioned. But did you want to go over some of these key points that you had raised? Chief Salon, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so sorry about that. So I had a second to try and find the mute button. It has to do with, the evolution of community policing and co-responder programs. I believe that, oftentimes it's a misnomer in our profession that community policing is what we do between calls for service, when the reality is that community policing should be the absolute driving force behind your entire operation model. And identifying your core constituents in your community, which is any group of people that meet on a regular basis or have particular needs, establishing relationships with those core constituencies, and then basically establishing, I like to say, a more multi-tiered, disciplined, and nuanced response model that can actually is a little more tailored to the needs of the communities once you get a better idea of how to who you have in your community. I'd also add the fact that, adding a therapy dog to our SRO model has been incredibly helpful as well. I can tell you that, my own son has a hard time with transitions, and obviously kids in the morning have a very, very difficult time transitioning from home to school. And that Bentley, our therapy dog, is generally available at every bus that is dropping kids off and at the drop off in the morning. And I can tell you that he has made, on one hand, kids' days start off easier. And then secondarily, as the day goes on, he's an excellent engagement, I don't want to call him a tool, but he's an excellent engagement tool that facilitates kids actually approaching our SROs and talking to them and petting Bentley and having, but he's also available to help out with stuff like that. The other element I would say is that, when it comes to officer wellness, it's implementing these type of changes are going to help officers' long-term mental health as well, because the officers, I tell you, oftentimes get frustrated when they don't have resources to help them solve problems that they face regularly.
Great points. Thank you so much. And I noticed in the chat, someone said therapy cats too. So we don't want to discriminate between dogs and cats. Cats can also be very helpful in the situations. I don't know how easy it is to take them with you. On when you're going out, but that's something to think about. And then Chief Scott, I know you had mentioned the piece of technology. Was there anything else you wanted to add here on this point? Oh, you're muted. You're still muted.
I'm sorry. Yeah, nothing else to add on technology. I think it covers the gamut of the things that are emerging, particularly the locative technology. Really important, as was said earlier in the presentation. Wandering is an issue, and that locative technology, and it's so available now. I mean, you can go to your local retail store, Costco, you name the place, and you know, whether it be the eye tags or it's other technologies, it's so available now. I think we really do ourselves well to take advantage of that when it comes to dealing with some of the encounters with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities.
Great, thank you. And I was actually going to mention the issue of wandering and technology, because we're working on a project right now with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which I will mention right now. Did you see how I did that? So through the Kevin and Avante's law that was enacted in 2018, it provides funding to law enforcement and public safety agencies to implement locative technologies with regard to children and also adults who wander. And so we've got the website here if you're interested to learn more about the technology that is currently being used. One of the roles that we play at the ARC of the United States is to make sure that we bring that the concerns just around autonomy and making sure that people with disabilities do have their own autonomy, can make decisions, are supported in making decisions around whether or not that they want to use a tracking device once they become adults. And so these are some of the interesting things we're talking about right now, and we're going to have a webinar, I believe it's May 9th, on this topic. So let us know if you're interested in that. Briefly wanted to mention one of our training, our kind of signature training is called Pathways to Justice. And what this does is provide a one-day training that's completely focused on people with intellectual and developmental disability. And we create a disability response team as a first step. And work with that team to provide a one-day training at your location, and then provide ongoing technical assistance once a plan is in place about how to address maybe specific issues in your community on that. We've been in throughout the country, we have 15 disability response teams in 12 different states, and we are continuing to provide training, and so grateful for the Bureau of Justice Assistance who provided the seed money to start this way back in 2013. And I wanted to go ahead and let you know about some other resources available for download. So I think we mentioned these earlier, but if you go to the www.informedpoliceresponses.com, you will find these two pagers, so nice and short. One is focused on mental health conditions and developmental disabilities. You know, why is it important to know the difference between the two? And Chief Scott, you just gave me an idea. We should have one around substance use as well. So maybe we'll put that one on the list because that's a great one. But that kind of provides an understanding of the two different disabilities side by side, but also knowing that they can be co-occurring. And then the second one that we created is called Developmental Disabilities, What Law Enforcement Officers Need to Know. So that a lot of this, what you've heard today, you'll see in this resource document that can be useful for training purposes and just to have handy. And this is the project today that brought you this webinar. And if you want to see more of our resources, not only the two pagers we just showed you, but other resources as well, you can go to the websites here. And as we wrap up though, I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to sort of give their final takeaway, or what would be your key takeaway that you would like for everyone to hear from you today about this topic. And Chief Scott, you look unmuted, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, first of all, I really want to thank you, Leanne, and everybody that helped put this together, because this is really important work. And one of the takeaways, although I don't know if any of us said the word, it's been talked about and talked around, is collaboration. This is a collaborative process, and I go back to, I think what we all have said is that it takes not just the police department changing training and culture and those things, but we really have to open ourselves up as police officials and executives to the thoughts and ideas of our respective communities, and then work together to make this as good as we can make it in terms of how we interact, how we encounter, how we deal with it. Because the bottom line, I think what we all want is good outcomes, good communications, for people to be safe. So I'm going to stress my final thought to just reiterate the need for collaboration is more than it ever has been before, particularly for our world, for those of us that have decided to make policing our lifelong profession.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chief Scott. And it is hard to believe we didn't use that word. I don't think we did yet. So that's a perfect word to keep in our minds as we think about working with local agencies and people with developmental disabilities themselves. That collaboration piece is so, so important. So Chief Sellon, what do you got for us?
So I'm gonna piggyback on the good Chief Scott's statements with regards to collaboration, and I'm gonna also add outreach, because what we're talking about here oftentimes when you're talking about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their family units, by the way, they are oftentimes the people with the least amount of free time to be able to look for resources for themselves and for their family members. They're also most likely the least likely to reach out to you, because I can't tell you how often in my career I've heard from work colleagues that, well, if so-and-so needs help, they'll call us. No, they won't. It's up to us to identify who they are in our communities. Like Chief Scott just pointed out, collaborate, outreach, and most importantly, develop a culture of empathy and understanding regarding the specific needs to your.
Excellent, excellent points. Thank you so much. And I love when you say it that way, it sounds so proactive. And I think that that's what is important about that, is understanding that families or people with disabilities don't necessarily know what to do or how to do it, or like you said, don't have time. And thinking about that proactive piece of it is so important. That is really powerful. Thank you. And then Russell, I think we'll end with you for your final thoughts and takeaways.
Yeah, I guess my final thought will, I'm a motivational speaker. I'm a poet. So my final thought is going to be in the form of a short spoken word poem. I took this from an article I wrote for Psychology Today that I think Julie can drop into the chat if anybody's interested in reading my article on invisible disabilities and police encounters. But I'm just going to wrap it up with a spoken word poem titled Triggered. Triggered. Don't pull your triggers. 0 neurotransmitters function when my brain's on fire. Rapid synapse fire. Officer, don't fire. This is my short circuit court of appeal, that when I short circuit, I'll plead for a deal. Show my hands. I need you to lend me yours. The current hand I've been dealt is raw. Don't make this any worse. I'm in pain. I can't hear your command, to my disdain. I'd explain, but I really can't. I'm on the ground. You say stand up, I don't understand. Back against the wall, my brain's AWOL, leaving my body unmanned. So here I am, hitting myself in the head. While my OCD kicks my ass, I'm wishing I was dead. I pound my chest and scream and cuss. You would think I was possessed, but trust me when I say I'm just frustrated at this mess of a life. Here I am again under duress. I'm so over the stress of being placed under arrest by my mind. Call it the mastermind, because I'm just along for the ride, the Bonnie to its Clyde. Understand that my innocence, in no sense, is a cause for concern or your self-defense. I may appear incensed or at the very least tense. Hell, I may be a public speaker, but right now my autism presents. What I need is just 4 words. A simple, what can I do? How can I help? Or, hey, are you okay? A gentle tone, not too stern. Be sincere in what you say. Keep the question simple so I can respond yay or nay. You see, your goal is to get me to sheriff. You have compassionate intentions as a cop or a sheriff. Your training and education will transform the vehicle. Sorry. Empathy is the vehicle in which your training and education will drive us both home instead of down to the station. My apologies.
That was actually impressive. I don't know that I could have gone that far, actually.
It's
'cause
a brand new poem too, and we're running out of time, so I had to rush it.
Yeah,
I
that was so
apologize.
good. You're already getting a lot of comments about how good that was and
Mhm.
how creative and important it is that we use our creativity to bring these messages across from different ways. And we really do thank you, Russell, for the work that you've put in to help just broaden the understanding around these issues. And also in a way that we can sit down and have a conversation about it. And do that in a balanced way. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of our panelists today for being here and being willing to bring yourself into this conversation, your lived experience as a person with a disability and as a parent. And I think that that's what really makes the difference when we start talking about strategy, solutions, and long-term like sustainability around really providing hope in these situations. So we thank you for that. And I think now if we have time for questions, we might have a little bit of time, but I'll hand it over back to, I'm not sure who for Q&A. Is that you, Mike?
Yeah, there's about 5 minutes left. There's a couple questions in here. One is any tips on buy-in, gaining buy-in from county departments who are not fully engaged or interested in engaging in the, this is specific to CIT training.
So yeah, I think that's a great question for Chief Scott. You want to take that one? How to help with that buy-in piece?
Sure. I don't know if this is a tip, but my recommendation is be patient and have vision for the long-term game, because it's not an overnight process for those cities or departments or counties that are starting from scratch. I mean, for us, it took years to get to where we are, and we still have work that to be done. So a lot of patience, a lot of collaboration, and we're going to go back to that and really have a plan of where you want to get to. I mean, I think it's easier to get buy-in when people can agree upon a common vision and a common goal of where we want to get to. So it's really important to set that up from the start. What do we want? Better outcomes, better training, better collaboration, better communication, whatever the wants are. If you can create a common vision, you got, I think, a better chance of getting there.
Thanks, Chief. Another question, Ramona Lumpkin asks, are recovery or peer coaches ever considered to assist?
I love that question. So you're talking about like recovery, peer-to-peer support. I think that's the question. One of the things that we've been talking about within the National Center here is how we can work with mental health field to ensure that people with IDD can be part of responding as well and can be peer-to-peer support coaches. So we're looking at how can we work with the existing system within mental health and bring people with IDD into peer-to-peer support. And in a way that people can get paid for what they're doing as well, providing their expertise, providing what they know, how to talk to people with intellectual developmental disabilities, their own lived experience. And that's something that really isn't happening yet. So if for anyone who wants to talk more about that, I'm all ears, and looking at how we can bring folks with IDD more to the table around these issues.
And the final question in our Q&A here is, what are some barriers to training for the officers who are the boots on the ground? And is training process procedures set and enforced by local jurisdictions?
I can take a stab at that as well. Some of the barriers are time constraints. Most departments, I mean, I don't know of any department that has all the resources that they probably would like to have. And when you have to take officers out of the field to train, it's worth it. Don't get me wrong here. I mean, please hear me clearly. It's worth every second and every dollar we spend on training, but there are pressures with trying to keep your deployment where it needs to be to provide, the basic level of public safety calls to service. And as Chief Sellon said earlier, and we always should be working from a framework of community policing, which takes time too, during calls and in between calls and in officers' available time. So training, when they're in training, our CIT training alone is 50 hours. So taking an officer out of the field for basically an entire work week and then some is a really heavy lift. So that's one of the barriers. The other, I think, in some jurisdictions, particularly after 2020, and when the incident involving Mr. George Floyd, there were a lot of our community partners, at least in our region and our city, that really had a hard time engaging with police, for a while. And that's starting to turn around now, but people were so upset at, just that incident. And I think there was a rippling effect, and it really did strain some of our relationships that we had had for a long time. So I do see a reset in that, but policing is volatile. It's, these type of incidents happen from time to time. And we really have to weather those storms and make sure that, we have to take care of those things and address them when they happen. But we have to keep focus on this type of work to make sure that outside distractions don't interfere and cause a barrier to this type of important work.
Thanks, Chief. And we'll close out with that. And I can't thank all of our panelists enough for taking time out of your day. This has been one of the most informative webinars I've ever been a part of. So I can't thank you all enough for providing your expertise. Russell, you knocked it out of the park, my friend. You did a great job with your poem there. The comments are blowing up in the chat. So nicely done to you. Thank you again to all of our wonderful, amazing panelists. And on behalf of the Academic Training to Inform Police Responses, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the University of Cincinnati, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the ARC of the United States, and Policy Research Associates, please move forward, take this training, and hopefully there's a lot of really good information that you're able to get in the chat. There was an incredible amount of conversation in there. And this webinar will be available. The recording will be available in the coming days for your review. There was a lot of questions about that. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.